Hello, welcome back to another guy who reads way too many comic books, plays far too many video games, and is probably not acting his age, telling you the problems with the world of comic books. Today I want to talk to you about the internet. Boo! Hiss! Tear it down! The problem with the internet is, simply put, you shouldn't be listening to it. And I want to talk about this in the context of the argument of comic books are always rebooting. They're always going back to their status quo. Because the fact of the matter is, if that's your argument as to why you don't want to read American comics, you're wrong. I'm going to tell you why. But today's episode is brought to you by Gamer Subs. Use the code COMICS at checkout to get yourself waifu cup stuff, where they put like anime women on the cup. And don't worry, I know many of you are embarrassed to wear your anime apparel out in public. I am not. I have no shame. But if you are embarrassed by wearing your anime apparel out in public, it's on a cup. You can just have it around your house. You can have your favorite waifu on your cup looking back at you from your favorite video game. So when you lose at League of Legends, you can go, oh, but you forgive me. And if you do that, use the code COMICS at checkout, because that would really help our channel. And don't forget, you can find Comicstorian over on Spotify, where we're doing re-uploads of old full stories. And you can find our sister channel, Comicstorian Full Story, to keep up with our current content if you miss the 4-hour-long videos. All right, so let's talk about the problem with rebooting continuity. And, well, I couldn't think of a proper title for this video, so I don't know what it's going to come out, because it's not really a problem with. It's more of a discussion. A discussion as to why you should not be listening to the internet and jumping on the trends and arguing that comic books go back to status quo. But that won't fit in the YouTube title, so Dan's going to figure out a better title later. And I want to start by going over why I wanted to have this discussion. So I was browsing Reddit, as us men of culture do very often, and in between my subreddits of looking at people in their fresh fits on the sneakers subreddit, or checking out the arguments over who the hottest waifu is and the Nikki Goddess of Victory subreddit is, or just looking at the boob subreddit, I came across the Superman subreddit. And in the Superman subreddit, somebody asked a very interesting question. How did you feel when Superman died? Now that was interesting to me, because how did I feel when Superman died? Superman died around 91 to 93, somewhere in there. I want to say 92. Don't hold me to that. I'm too lazy to look it up right now because it doesn't matter. But Superman died in the early 90s. Now, what a lot of people don't realize who are reading comic books now, first off, that's 30 years ago. That's why there's 30-year anniversaries about the death of Superman and the reign of Superman and all of this kinds of stuff. But as I saw in that Reddit, people are idiots. But not because they're on Reddit, because I'm also on Reddit, which makes me also an idiot, but because they listen to the internet. So people started discussing how the death of Superman meant nothing to them. The death of Superman was just another death in comics. The death of Superman was just the usual status quo change-up in a comic book, and they expected within a year for it to go back to the way it was. Now, if you were talking to someone who reads comic books today, that would be their argument. If I was like, Batman just died, and they'd be like, well, he's going to be back in a year. But that's not how it was when Superman died. Superman dying was the first time something like that actually happened. Prior to that, we had the death of Supergirl, and we had the death of Barry Allen. Both of those had stuck. When Barry Allen died, Wally West took over. That was it. There was no Barry Allen return 2 years later. It took 20 years for Barry Allen to return, and when he finally did, if you happen to read classic Barry Allen Flash stories and you read Jeff Johns' Return, that's not the same Barry Allen. Personality-wise, attitude-wise, everything was different. It's fine, it works, but that's not the same Barry Allen. But we'll come back to that later. Superman dying was monumental because it had never been done before. Well, the death of a superhero had been done before, but the idea that Superman and Batman could die had never been done before. And superheroes didn't come back from the dead. Superman coming back from the dead 8 to 10 months later, that broke the mold. So all of these kids on Reddit who are stating that they didn't think the death of Superman mattered because they just assumed he'd come back because that's what comic books do, are wrong. You may have assumed he was going to come back because he's Superman, but comics didn't do that. There was no, oh, this is happening. This is going to happen again. Batman just died, but he came back 6 months later. Superman just died, but he's going to come back. That didn't happen. Barry Allen died, Supergirl died, and then Superman died. And there were some minor no-name characters that no one cares about that died in between that, but that doesn't matter. Superheroes never came back from the dead at that point. That was a brand new thing. So Reddit being Reddit, I just chuckled about it and went, that's dumb. Like, Do these kids really think that comic book fans are going to think that, oh yeah, 30 years ago, before I was even born, I thought, because I'm like, no 50-year-old man's going to be like, yeah, Superman coming back, that was every other Tuesday. They would know. They would know what's going on. But I started reading down the Reddit, and a lot of people had that response. The response was, I assumed it was going to go better. I just figured it was going to fix itself. Comics do it all the time. And I'm like, what? And there was a lot of people agreeing with them. So that got me thinking. I was reading Gotham War with Batman in it. And yet, love it or hate Gotham War, I like it. It's got its problems, but no storyline in existence does not have its problems. You can choose to rage bait over it, or you can choose to enjoy what you found to be fun about it. And I chose to enjoy what I found to be fun about Gotham War. But at the ending of Gotham War, my expectation was that we were going to get what we normally get from all of the loud minorities on the internet. Not minority as in a minority, the loud minority of people who want to talk on the internet about comics and how much they hate them. Because that seems to be the minority of the comic community. Because I post a video and you're all excited about what's happening to Batman, regardless of it being Gotham War. But I go on Twitter and everyone's like, ah! Oh my God, it's the worst thing I have ever read in my entire life. This man should be hung for what he has done to Batman. I'm just like, what is wrong with you people? Go read another comic if you find it that bad. But whatever. So I thought, okay, well, people are going to come out because if you can come out of Axe, Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals, and you can state that nothing happened in Axe, then you didn't really read Axe. And if you don't know what happened in Axe, the whole world knew about the X-Men's resurrection. The Inhumans were pretty much eradicated. The gods were pretty much stepped away. There was a lot of things that happened in Axe. Now, someone did make a comment that a lot of these changes are subtle, so unless you're really paying attention, you're not going to catch them. And that's a valid argument, but we're not here to make that argument right now. The argument is that things happen in Axe. So I made a tweet. I made a tweet about Gotham War. And my tweet was, by the way, if you want to follow us on Twitter and join these conversations, because this is where I sort out a lot of my thoughts before I make these videos, it's at Comicstorian on X. I wish I could say Tweeter. I wish I could say Twitter, because that's where you tweet. But what do I do on X? So it's like, okay, hey, hold on. I'm tweeting on X? No. It doesn't make sense. I don't know what to say. Am I Xing? It doesn't work. But anyway, if you want to join our X conversation, join us over on X. So I tweeted out the changes that Gotham War did. I tweeted out, Gotham War is over. Before people go around spouting, it means nothing because they didn't read it. Here's the ramifications. Batman is no longer working with the Bat family due to Zur-En-Arrh's influence. Batman is now cut off from the Bat network. Batman injected Red Hood with fear toxin. If his adrenaline spikes, Red Hood can't be a superhero. Whether or not that's going to be huge, we don't know yet. Lazarus pits have been kind of revived. We don't know if they're all over the world or if it's even a true Lazarus pit, but there is one beneath Gotham City again. People believe Catwoman to be dead, although it is revealed on the last page that she is in fact not dead because she does the usual Gotham City thing where you want everyone to think you're dead, but then you stand on a ledge very far away as a shadow and show them all that you're kind of alive, but you don't tell them you're alive. You just give them the silhouette so they can basically go, oh, Catwoman's alive. That rambunctious little girl. Maybe I shouldn't call her that. Anyway, and then there's a few minor things like Batman declaring Dick should be leading the Bat family, Tim Drake proving that he is the best Robin in existence, things like that happened. And I thought that was it. I'll have a little fun. I'll put out a little tweet talking about the ramifications of Gotham War. Of course, this led to about 50% of the people telling me that it was trash. One guy tweeted me 4 times to let me know that it was trash. It didn't matter. It's garbage. I shouldn't read it. Separate tweets. Like, dude, what are you doing? I think you should find a hobby, man. I got this game I play. It's called Final Fantasy XIV. Try it. It'll eat up so much time. But there was one tweet that made me think about the moment of Superman on Reddit, which I chuckled about. There was a tweet from an individual that said, it's comics. They always go back to status quo. And I was like, wait a minute. Do comics go back to status quo? This is the big argument that everyone likes to make about manga versus American comics. That American comics always go back to a status quo within 6 years, within 1 year, within 6 months. It's whatever the argument wants to allow for. And then a counterpoint is that manga tells you never-ending stories, and this is how manga is handled. Manga will tell you a 1,000-chapter story called One Piece, or manga will tell you the story of Dragon Ball for 30 years, or Bleach, or Naruto, or any of the other big, long-standing manga. That's the argument everyone likes to make. But it's not accurate. It's not wrong. It's very surface level. So that got me thinking. That got me really pondering what was going on. So I made a follow-up tweet. And I tweeted out things that have not changed. Now, if you don't know, The way that the American comic company works is they're very much about IPs. They really only care about the IP itself. Case in point, let's take a character like Batman. If Batman is selling relatively well, Batman's going to continue to sell no matter what. If a writer wants to do 100 issues, he's allowed to do 100 issues as long as it keeps selling. Then that writer will leave and will bring in a new writer. That writer's job is to take over the previous run, keep what he wants, but throw out what he doesn't. It's generally known as a soft reboot because, case in point, going from Tom King to James Tynion, we had a very large tonal shift. We had a very different direction that was going on. But the ramifications of the City of Bane, the death of Alfred, and what happened with Damian carried over, okay? But that doesn't mean there wasn't a tonal shift. That does happen. When looking at the Japanese market and looking at manga, manga doesn't treat things as an IP in the same way as a Western unit. The very few times has that happened, and I'll use them as examples later. Most of the time with manga, it's one writer from beginning to the end. If the story doesn't succeed, they cancel it, and they put another one that is very close to being like that. Now, once again, I'll come back to the manga argument shortly. But let's go back to comic books. Let's take Batman, for example, again, because Batman's a great example of a story that actually hasn't ended in a very long time. 2011 started Scott Snyder's run on Batman. Scott Snyder is the one that brought you Death of the Family, Court of the Owls. He brought us the robot Batman, James Gordon, all that stuff. All that stuff that is still referenced and still relevant today. When New 52 ended in 2016 and we officially rolled into Rebirth, well, New 52 ended in 2014 and then 2016 with the Rebirth, but we're going to ignore DCU for the sake of this argument because DCU did continue the timeline because that was robot Jim Gordon, but whatever. We're just going to say that Scott Snyder pretty much wrote Batman until 2016, regardless of what the titling of the initiative was. 2016, we had DC Rebirth. Now, DC Rebirth did not throw out everything that happened in New 52 era, but it did tonally shift Batman. Tom King took over for DC Rebirth. So DC Rebirth came out with a brand new #1 and was considered a soft reset. The reason it's called a soft reset as opposed to a hard reset or a reboot is because the soft reset is pretty much a tonal shift. It's an initiative normally from the publishing house to do one idea, one direction, one thing. At the time, DC Rebirth was bringing the heroes back to the heroes that you loved, that brought them up, that got them to where you wanted them to be. And now we're going to be dealing with Watchmen and Dr. Manhattan. Now, if you know the DC Rebirth storyline, you know that did not pan out as intended. But that's also another video for another day. But Batman didn't forget Court of the Owls happened. Batman did not forget Joker cut off his face. Batman did not forget that Jim Gordon became Batman for a short amount of time. All of that stayed. And then Tom King took over and started throwing in his own tonal shift to Batman. He went for 85 issues. In that series of stuff, we had the Catwoman wedding. We had Damian quitting because Alfred's death was pretty much put on him. And we had City of Bane, in which Bane took over. Also, Gotham, that's actually a superhero, and Gotham Girl, they do show up later on. But these are elements off the top of my head. It's not even going nitty-gritty into it. That stayed around. At issue 85, James Tynion took over. James Tynion started us off with a couple little like breathing room stories after the City of Bane, but that did lead to Joker War. Joker War stripped Bruce Wayne of his multi-billion-dollar fortune. He was only a millionaire, which at the time we all laughed about, but it actually did change things up. Case in point, Wayne Manor went up for sale. Okay, he didn't own Wayne Manor anymore, so he was sneaking into the Batcave. He lived in a brownstone all the way down on the baseline of Gotham, where he kept a lot of his additional gear. And he didn't have a lot of the resources he had before. Now, that one is a very subtle change, because overall, it's very hard to notice someone who doesn't have billions going to only having millions. It's like, oh, what did it really change? Okay, he doesn't have a manor, he doesn't run Wayne Enterprises, and he's not funding the Justice League. Oh, by the way, the Justice League is disbanding, so that doesn't even matter. We're not going to see those ramifications. So it wasn't very obvious, that change, but it did stay. Also, at the end of that, Joker finally left Gotham. Another thing that did stay. Now, bear in mind, these events were happening like 2019, 2020, around that time frame. DC Rebirth started in 2016. DC New 52 Batman started in 2011. And there are these events sticking around. There's no status quo shift back to. They're basically just lining up a new status quo. The argument comes down to, what do you consider to be Batman's status quo? Is the status quo for Batman that he lives in Wayne Manor, runs Wayne Enterprises, and has Robin as his sidekick? That wasn't even happening at DC Rebirth. There wasn't even a Robin at that time. Or is status quo for you Batman working solo? That would have been DC Rebirth. Status quo, what does it even mean? It doesn't mean anything when everyone has their own version of what Batman is. But anyway, this gets even worse or better, depending on how you look at it. Alfred's death was in 2019. 2019, we are going on 2024, and that man is still dead. If I wanted anyone to come back from the dead, it was Alfred, okay? We have had the death of Wonder Woman and the revival of Wonder Woman in that time. She was also a god in the middle of that somewhere. But anyway, Batman still lost his money. Damian still talks about Lazarus Island and his sabbatical and leaving. He's now back with Batman, but he's been gone for 4 years. He literally, I'm not joking, Batman and Robin, as you know it, the proper Batman and Robin started 2 months ago. In the book, Batman and Robin. Before that, the status quo of Batman working with Robin, we got hints of it with Tim and Chip Zdarsky's run, but it wasn't back to that. We weren't back to that. We were just having Batman. Another example of US comic books having the same exact trend that you all think is a status quo, Spider-Man. Brand New Day was a reboot for Spider-Man. That was like 2005, 2006. It's mid-2000s, okay? That storyline continually ran without resetting Spider-Man until Nick Spencer's run, 2018. 13 years roundabouts, add or take away 1 or 2, of Dan Slott writing one direction of Spider-Man. He started from living in the apartment to running an organization known as Parker Industries and being one of the richest men in the world and having to throw it all away to go back to what some would consider a Spider-Man status quo. Nick Spencer literally titled the story Back to the Basics. It was a return to what people thought of as Spider-Man's back to the basics status quo. Living in an apartment, having no money, and everyone hates him. We went right back to that at 2018. That run ran until 2022 without skipping a beat. The remnants of that run have picked up into Zeb Wells' Spider-Man Beyond, in which we shifted over to Ben Reilly as Spider-Man. Spider-Man Beyond then ended at like 100 or something like that, and the book restarted at issue 1. But it didn't truly restart. We got issue 1 where Zeb Wells was continuing to write it, which meant the ramifications of Batman Beyond were still there. It meant that stuff that happened with Nick Spencer was still there, such as Spider-Man's apartment and stuff like that, meaning Spider-Man has not had a return to status quo since 2018. So the argument that we're going to go right back to the status quo is what the whole point of this video is. Now, your counterpoint's going to be, Benny, those are the most successful superheroes. Of course they're going to have ongoing storylines. You're just using the best examples to support your point. You're right. I am. That's how being a YouTuber who wants to make a point works. I only tell you the side of the argument that I want you to hear. Anyway, let's bring up everybody's latest favorite character to bash on, poop on, and just crap all over. Because she has a movie coming out next week, which I forgot was next week. Captain Marvel or the Marvels or whatever it is. It's next week at the time of recording this. Dan's face tells me he also didn't know the Marvels was coming out. So she's the internet's favorite punching bag, right? Everyone loves to crap all over Captain Marvel. And to add to that, Captain Marvel does have true reboots. She gets these books, Captain Marvel and this, Captain Marvel and that, where they basically give her 6 to 12 issues and they reboot the run. This is where a problem comes with manga versus US properties. If this were to happen in Shonen Jump, because a lot of you don't read Shonen Jump, you read your favorite manga, or as most of you do, you just watch the anime. So you get really mad when I say things that happen in the manga, because I read the manga. But anyway, in Shonen Jump, a new series will start. That series may or may not make it past 6 to 12 chapters, might get to 20 chapters. A chapter is the equivalent of an issue in the US market. Let's say an isekai started. If you don't know what an isekai is, it's some character being removed from like here, normally some high school student who ends up in their favorite fantasy world video game or science fiction adventure. Okay, it's pretty much what an isekai is. Do you know how many isekais start up in Shonen Jump? They make it 6 to 12 issues. or chapters, and then they get shut down? I'll bet you don't, because you only read Demon Slayer, Dragon Ball, and stuff like that. But the point I'm making is a lot. And then they just start up another isekai. And they just keep doing that until they succeed. Now, taking that to the American audience, every time they reboot Captain Marvel, it's a completely different tonal shift, okay? The tonal shift is what we get in the US version. It's not a status quo, it's not a reboot, it's a tonal shift. So she'll have one story where she's killing the Avengers in an alternate universe. She'll have another story where she's going to become the Doctor Strange of whatever. Then she'll have a story where she's just off on the coastline dealing with her own anxieties. Or she'll have a storyline in which she's trying to cope with killing off Tony Stark. But if they don't sell, they cancel the book and then start with a new writer, okay? So you'll have 8 number ones for Captain Marvel, which is all brand new reboots. Now, that's no different than a different isekai following the exact same pattern as previous isekais. Or another thing about people learning demon powers and how they're going to tame demons to work for them. And one of them's very scantily clad. Shonen Jump will do the same thing. And then when it gets successful, you hear about it. You hear about Dragon Ball. You hear about One Piece. You hear about Jujutsu Kaisen. I can't pronounce it. We all have established that over in the Manga-storian channel. You should check it out. You know, that one's only from 2018. Now, I want to use Jujutsu Kaisen. Kaisen's what we're going to call it. Dan's trying to, I'm not even going to say the name in it. We're just going to call it Kaisen. It started in 2018. It is announced it's coming to its ending, meaning that it has gone on for about 6 years, probably by the time it comes to its inevitable conclusion. I just told you a Batman run that technically has been going on since 2011, but if you want to go to a more fresher reboot, was 2016. That beats that. The Spider-Man run was 13 to 15 years. And when a comic book does succeed, unlike Captain Marvel, like Immortal Hulk, it goes from being an unannounced line, because it could be canceled at any point, to a 50-issue run, which spans like 4 or 5 years. And then the Hulk went back to the status quo, but it wasn't. He became a spaceship, and it was terrible. And now he's back to Immortal Hulk. So is Immortal Hulk the status quo? The argument of the status quo is what I'm arguing here. Now, I also want to throw more manga under the bus before we bring this video to a conclusion, because it's going on very long. And I felt like I've, for the first time in a long time, been on point with my argument. Guys, can we celebrate? Can you give me some claps down below? I don't feel like we've looped too much here. But when I tweeted this out, people's biggest reaction was, 1, this doesn't happen in manga, which it does, and I'll explain it better in a second. And 2, it's subtle changes that unless you're reading, you're not going to notice. Now, let me ask you this. The subtle changes argument. Let's go with that first. Let's take arguably the most popular anime/manga in existence. Arguably, because I know I'm starting a firefight down below. Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super. Did you see the one I named in the middle there, GT? Did you see that one? Okay, so let me ask you this. If you were to watch Dragon Ball at the Vegeta saga, dropped off midway through, and you came back at the Cell saga, would you notice the subtle changes that have gone on with the characters? Or would you just go, wow, he's stronger? Case in point, Dragon Ball's been going on for 30 years. Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z to Dragon Ball Super is one direction. But you know what happens to anime and manga that is wildly successful, that gets treated like a Western property? We shit on it. Look at Dragon Ball GT. It is universally revered as being like the not Dragon Ball Dragon Ball. It's got fans. People enjoy it. I thought it was a fun ride, but it's not good. Okay? Let's not argue. Let's not like split hairs here. It doesn't compare to even Super. And Super's got people who hate it. Okay? But let's look at another property that is being treated like a Western style where they just take the IP and they reboot it. Gundam. No Gundam series lines up. Maybe some of the earlier ones did when I was younger and I don't remember how they went beat for beat. But right now I'm watching Witch of Mercury. They have redefined what a Gundam is. It's not even like the Gundam that we know. It is something totally different. And that series is amazing. I'm really enjoying it. Let's use one that Dan gave me as an example. And I'm going to give him credit for this because I know he wants me to use it. Sword Art Online. Every time they get into a VR game, Kirito, it's Kirito, right? I believe that's how you say his name, practically dies, gets out, never again. Ooh, a new MMO came out. Woo! Like, And they basically reboot the series with Kirito again. Like, it just keeps happening. Everyone likes to argue that anime and manga don't do what Western markets do. They just don't do it nearly as often, okay? Because traditionally what's going to happen is if the writer owns it, we're all going to agree it's good. Look at One Piece. Look at Bleach. Bleach is, before you all fight me on that one, Bleach has its own issues, but I'm not in that fight right now. Even look at some of the classics like Tokyo Ghoul, Parasite, the ones that you do hear about. They stay with one guy and they come to an inevitable conclusion. They don't get treated as an IP. But the Japanese market does treat them as IPs as well. Look at Dragon Ball, Gundam, Sword Art Online. Also, Neon Genesis Evangelion, how much merchandise of that? That thing will never go away. And the actual series came out in the late 90s. I mean, come on, serious. I know I watched the finales that just came out finally, but it doesn't matter. This thing came out in the late 90s, all right? It still won't go away. And the creators rebooted it. The creator himself was like, I kind of messed some shit up. Let's try again. To bring this all full circle, when you sit here and you say, Batman is going back to the status quo, my counterpoint with that is, when was the last time you read Batman? And what is the status quo? Is the status quo Batman working with Robin, fighting against the Joker? Because we haven't been there in a very long time. Is the status quo Superman just going off to fight Lex Luthor and beat up on a giant ape, Giganto, or whatever this one is? Because we haven't been there. Lex is a superhero right now. Okay, like we haven't been to that status quo in a long time. These changes might be subtle, but if you're actually reading concurrently, like or hate the current storylines, you will see that this is not a status quo shift or revert or whatever. The last time I would say that we had a true reboot, true status quo shift was 2015 after Marvel had Secret Wars, in 2011 when New 52 happened. That's the closest we've had to true reboots and true whatever. And even New 52 wasn't a true reboot and a true status quo change because a lot of the stuff from prior stuck around. They just made it confusing. That's pretty much what they did. I also want to comment, if you want to be a part of our discussions on X, I did use Naruto as a reboot situation as well because of Baruto, I think that's how you say it. I haven't watched either one, so that one's not on my situation at all. Baruto, but Dan's laughing at me. He says I got it right that time. Okay. And I was told it is not a reboot, hence why that was not an example. So before someone tries to argue about Naruto, if you try to argue that it's a reboot, we're wrong. We're wrong. Okay. It's a continued storyline. Also, there was another follow-up point. Time skips are basically soft reboots. And someone responded with, no, that's characterization. I'm calling bullshit on that. Okay. I really am. Because if it was characterization, then we'd be allowed to see what happened. Doing a time skip allows you to skip the whole argument and just say this happened. That's not characterization. That's not growing. It's like a jump to the end point, okay? Time skips are just a way to chop out what the author deems to be boring. Case in point, I'll use one last example and we're going to wrap up this video. One Piece's time skip. I just got past it and everyone has crazy new powers. And I will not doubt that the reason we time skipped is because if we didn't time skip, we'd have 100 chapters of everyone just training. And that wouldn't actually be as interesting as you think it would be to watch. Do any of us want to see Goku running around the planet with the Grand Kai again? No, we don't want to see his training. That's why Dragon Ball Super skips it. Oh, hey, guess what they did between the chapters? They went to go hang out with Beerus again and train. So don't worry about that. It's done. We don't want that. Like, it's boring. That's why time skips exist. But don't use it as an excuse of characterization. It's a reboot. It's a very soft, very, very soft reboot because you're allowed to bring your character to a new point, a new power level, to new enemies, to do whatever you want. That's what it is, okay? But that's it. So let me know, I'm actually curious, what do you consider to be the status quo of your favorite superhero down below? And how do you feel about these tonal... Oh, I had one last example. Tonal shift, because everyone's going to argue tonal shifts don't happen in manga too. Chainsaw Man just did it. Chainsaw Man went from the entire story with Denji. We totally shifted, telling a story about the War Devil and Asa. And I won't say any more in case you're not reading the manga. But the entire thing changes for like 2 volumes to a brand new character. That is a straight up tonal shift. And then that when Denji does come back, completely new environment, completely new situation. So it does happen. It's a soft reboot. It just happened in Chainsaw Man. I have an entire theory as to why that happened, and maybe I'll make a video on Comicstorian, but we're not going to go into it here. Anyway, let me know what you guys think is the status quo of your favorite characters down below. Let me know what you think about this. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Am I completely off base? That's why I like these discussion videos. I want to know your opinions. And on that, I will see you next time right here at Comicstorian when we come up with another banger of a video. How you doing, fellow youngsters? And make sure you come back around when we put out another banger of a video that's going to be fire and bet and cop or slap or how you doing, fellow youngsters? I'll see you next time right here.